Hello and welcome back to AI Ramblings, episode 43. Thank you for joining us. I want to get started quickly because I have a number of things to kind of go through. There have been some important AI news items, but they have very interesting implications. These are things that are probably familiar to most of you, but I wanted to add some dimensions to each of these items that may not be some the framework that you all might have used. Core items I want to discuss at a high level. There are four things. We've talked over the last couple of weeks about OpenClaw, which used to be known as ClaudeBot, which is this AI agents framework, open source, done by Peter Steinberger, who's an accomplished entrepreneur programmer out of Austria. Now he's a full-time employee of OpenAI because OpenAI was able to acquire Peter for OpenClaw, which is this platform that was hotly competed for by both Meta, directly with Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman. And OpenAI was able to snag OpenClaw versus Meta. So that was a very big high level item. And I want to come back to that in a minute. But I just want to highlight three other things I want to talk about, and then we'll talk about them all together. Number two, we've got a lot more clarity on Apple's AI wearable strategy. A lot of fussing over the last year or so that Apple's behind on AI. I've been of the view that Apple actually is just where it should be. AI is coming to it, not the other way around. And it's going to be able to leverage their extraordinary platform of computer and smartphone platforms, wearable platforms to leverage AI. And now we have some clarity on their AI wearable strategy with products starting as early as later this year, going into next year. Third item is Amazon has become the biggest spender on AI compute of all of the Mag 7s, with over $200 billion planned for compute. They're sparing no expense, as it were. And obviously, them, along with Microsoft, Google, and Meta, are collectively spending, include the OpenAI spend and Anthropic spend, over $700 billion this year alone, which are extraordinary numbers, greater than the budgets of countries like Japan, Germany, etc. And then the last item in the list of high-level news items I wanted to talk about was India had an AI summit where the who's who of all of the US companies were present, along with Prime Minister Modi, and they laid out their AI strategy with partnerships and announcements of over $200 billion of investments in AI locally in India, a combination of US companies and Indian companies like Adani and Ambani Group and Tata are collectively investing hundreds of billions of dollars in AI data centers over the next, basically through the end of the decade. I'll have a lot of detail. I've written a lot about all of these. All of the details will be in the show notes for additional perusal. But let me just highlight a single point about each one of these items, and then we'll go to the main topic of the day. Number one, the OpenAI OpenClaw thing is important. We've talked a lot about the last year or so that chatbots, ChatGPT is the prime example, where in its fourth year of its anniversary, it was launched in November of 2022. The AI agents are the next big UI version of chatbots. And what OpenClaw represents is an open source version of that platform. There are closed versions of this. Anthropic, which is the leading company right now in AI agents and coding software with its core platforms around Claude Code and Claude Cowork, are essentially much more secure, more built up versions of the OpenClaw type of formulas. And what OpenAI is hoping to do with OpenClaw and Peter Steinberger is to create their version of that around its AI coding platform, Codex. And between those two, we're talking about multiple billions of dollars of revenues this year for those two companies, basically catering to the developers, the tens of millions of developers in the world who are rapidly using these tools to become dramatically more productive. There's been a lot of talk about companies needing fewer engineers, fewer coders, and that may be the case in terms of quarter to quarter ebb and flow. But the reality from what we are seeing in terms of the numbers from not just these companies but their customers is that engineers, not just the top ones, the software coders, but the medium, the mid-level, the averages and median of these numbers are showing 10, 20, 30% or more productivity in terms of the amount of code generated. One of my topics later in this AI Ramblings session is going to be on my Read of the Week and some interesting additional statistics on this front. But the core point I wanted to leave you with on this AI agent thing is that AI agents are here. This is the next big thing post chatbots like ChatGPT. But unlike ChatGPT, which saw tens of millions of users, now 900 million weekly users around the world, AI agents are still very developer centric, enterprise centric, etc. In the next 2 years, through consumer products versions of this, like Anthropic's Cowork product, these are going to be just huge productivity tools for regular people. And that is going to happen sooner than later. And to understand the possibilities here, we really need to understand how it's impacting software coders, not in terms of job losses, but in terms of their ability to do more with these tools than the coders have been able to do for decades of traditional programming. So that is why this OpenClaw, all this mumbo jumbo about AI agents is very important. At this point, it's still not for mainstream audiences. It's the technologies are still relatively raw. They're not super safe. They require a lot of technical capability to tinker and play with and understand it, etc. But it's just going to change very quickly. To get a better sense of this, I've been up to my eyeballs on this and have gotten a better feel for this beyond just reading about the technologies. And I did want to communicate this key point on this item. Second, on the AI wearables. Look, I've had, again, several posts on this. We're going to see a flood of AI wearables this year, from Meta with smart glasses, pins and pendants, smart pens. OpenAI is rumored with Johnny Ives' help. That was a $6.5 billion acquisition less than a year ago, scheduled to launch a number of AI wearables starting, and not later this year as was earlier planned, but in the early part of 27. So we're going to see a number of form factors, smart glasses, pins, pendants, headphones. OpenAI is even rumored to be doing some sort of a smart lamp, as an example. But the Apple news is interesting because we're seeing some confirmation, not from Apple, but from Bloomberg, that has some sources there, basically indicating that as early as later this year, we're going to see AirPods potentially with cameras for ambient AI computing and a number of other possible devices. And the core point I want to leave with you is that we're going to see between today and a year and a half, similar products from everybody, everyone from Meta to Google to Apple, and a lot of smaller companies, alongside of them. But I wanted to highlight these three on a spectrum that's very important, which is trust. These products require huge amount of societal trust, because these cameras are going to be taking pictures and videos of people all day long. Yes, sometimes they will have lights, sometimes they may not, that indicate someone's recording. Meta, some documents leaked that they're going to introduce a feature called name tags for their smart glasses. And this is both an exciting feature to geeks like me, because you can walk into a room and it'll identify in your ear everyone in that room that you may not remember their names and their backgrounds, so you can have better conversations with them. The flip side is it can be used for stalking, lots of creepy things that people can do and probably will do. And so the companies selling these have to be trustworthy. And those three companies I mentioned that are at the forefront of things like smart glasses and wearables, meaning Apple, Google, and Meta, they're also kind of ranked today, pre these products, on trust and privacy. Meta is the weakest, as one might surmise, given the history from everything from Cambridge Analytica to how they're not moderating their social media in a number of ways. There's a lot of congressional things that Meta people were in front of regulators in DC and in LA this week. Again, a lot of details. We'll have it in the show notes. But then Google has already been through this 12 years ago, having invented the category of smart glasses 12 years ago. And there were Google glasses. Again, I'll have links of this. I've written about it, and you can Google it. But, the term glass hole came from literally a dozen years ago, when people wearing these things were recording and taking pictures of people without permission. And so there was that element. And Apple is the one with the highest level of perceived trust and respect for privacy. So it'd be interesting to see how these companies execute on these gadgets. This is not about gadgets. These are products that are going to be used by us in the millions and hundreds of millions. They have huge societal implications, positive and negative. And what we're looking for are executions on these things that are net societal positive. And there'll be a lot of mistakes made along the way, but also a lot of extraordinary sci-fi, gee whiz type of utility out of this that people are going to get a lot of benefit of. So that's what I wanted to highlight. Number one, on the trust thing. Second, Apple has a unique advantage relative to its peers and competitors. They have a 2 billion strong platform of smartphones, iPhones around the world. Yes, Google has their Android, but Android is far more fragmented amongst hundreds of OEMs who make devices on the Android software, but they are not coordinated and controlled by Google. And so Apple is in a unique position to leverage its smartphones, its iPhones and iPads and wearables and Apple Watches and computers with the hardware and software to really empower their AI gadgets, AI wearables classes, that they can offload a lot of the processing to the smartphone or to the iPhone or the devices, leverage off their battery life, economies of scale in terms of manufacturing. That is a subtle point that is missed in most of the discussion around AI wearables. People tend to think about them just as a gadget and, oh my God, what can they do? What colors do they come in? You want to look at the platform. You want to look at how they're integrated. What is their trust ranking? And then you want to look at how they're going to leverage the ecosystem, because that's how we as mainstream consumers are going to get the best functionality that's trustworthy, extraordinarily efficient in terms of how it does things. And Apple has a unique advantage here, and I just wanted to underline that. With that I wanted to move on to my main topic of this week, which is IPOs. With this year, if the markets hold the way they've been running, despite all the geopolitical concerns around trade and tariff, obviously we got some news that's good for the economy in terms of the tariffs potentially being overturned by from the administration by the Supreme Court, and obviously that'll go back and forth because it's a huge political football issue. But the markets are generally constructive, and there are three companies on the AI front that are all gearing for major IPOs. So cut to the chase. I've written about this. Three major mega AI IPOs expected this year. We don't know exactly when, but we have an idea. The biggest valued private company is SpaceX, which just merged with xAI. This is Elon Musk. He took $1 trillion valuation for SpaceX, which also includes Starlink. Combine it with xAI, that he got the valuation bumped up to $250 billion. So that's $1.25 trillion. The next up is OpenAI, which just completed or about to complete $100 billion funding at an $850 billion valuation. Third up is Anthropic, which is coming on strong, which I think could have a stronger business in the near term than even OpenAI. They just closed $30 billion at a $380 billion valuation. You add all of those up, that's a market cap pre-IPO this year. SpaceX somewhere in the middle of the year, Anthropic probably between now and the fall, and OpenAI probably the end of the year if they make it out of the market conditions hold. That's collectively $2.5 trillion. The collective revenues, because two out of those three are not yet profitable. SpaceX is profitable, but it's not clear how long they'll remain profitable because they're going to be investing huge amounts of money for xAI, which they just merged into SpaceX. So I'm going to put profitability aside for this year and next for all three of them. But if you look at the revenues, and again, it's a very fluid, dynamic number because of all these things like AI coding and so on that are really changing the numbers dynamically. But let's call it, based on the numbers that have been speculated out there, about 70 billion. So you're looking at relatively robust price to revenue numbers, 2.5 trillion over 70 billion. And if you compare this to the dot-com era, where I headed up Goldman's internet research effort starting in 94 to the dot-com bust in 2001 or 2, in that time frame, there were let's call it about 200 IPOs over that 6-7 year period. I had the privilege of being in the room and working as a lead research analyst for the best of that crop. But that at the peak was probably about $500 billion of pre-IPO market cap. So $500 billion compared to $2.5 trillion for these three mega IPOs for this year in AI. And from a price to revenue, the collective revenues of all of those companies was probably on the order of 25, maybe $30 billion. A lot of them unprofitable. So the price to revenue numbers are comparable, probably a little bit higher on the AI side, but the AI companies have a far different picture relative to the dot-com companies of their available market on a global basis. Back then, even in 2000, there was maybe 150, 200 million users of the internet around the world. Today, we're looking at 5 billion users of the internet on smartphones and desktops and so on, and climbing. It's a very different picture, apples to oranges in many ways, but I wanted to highlight how big the overall markets have gotten, how the AI IPOs alone, the three that I've talked about, just are heads and shoulders above anything we saw in the entire dot-com period, which is one of the 5 major tech waves that we've collectively been through. PCs in 82, internet, then followed by everything from social to cloud and mobile, and now to AI. So this is an important dynamic to keep in mind as we try and assess this era. A lot of debates over whether we're in an AI bubble or not. I think that's probably a premature question given the momentum that's going on to build these data centers and the macro environments that are going on. And yes, it'll be very volatile up and down, but the fundamentals are there in terms of the utility of these technologies early. And we have a lot of uncertainties as to when the technologies become mature, when they find product market fit with both consumers and businesses, and how they get monetized. There always is with technology, there'll be a lag between when we're expecting it to happen and when it will happen. So for investors, it's going to be a daunting, which is why I use the phrase, this is a daunting but exciting time for AI technology in this AI tech wave. And I wanted to provide that context, which I hope is a little useful. And that takes me to my major read of the week, which ties to this software thing I've been talking about. The head of Claude Code, which is one of the hottest growing products at Anthropic today, Boris Journey, he did a YouTube video, which I would recommend everyone if they have time to watch it. It's, even if you watch the first half hour of this or 20 minutes, and there's summaries of this, both in the show notes and in the transcripts of this. But he really talks a lot about how the coding business is changing dramatically because of this. There are very good signals in his discussion about how this is going to change what we think of productivity for regular office workers because of this technology. And it's definitely worth watching this, because you see it viscerally from the eyes of the people who literally have their entire careers coding was a skill. And you've got people like Boris saying he hasn't really done any actual coding for several months now. He leverages the cloud code. It does all the work. He checks it, supervises, then builds it, and then builds on top of it to really get massive jumps in productivity, not just for himself, but his engineers. And so it's an interesting read of the week that or watch of the week I would highlight. And then on the obsession side for the week, as many of you know, I've really been obsessing on a non-technical technology issue for the last couple of years, which is this whole business of geopolitical competition of US versus China, the trade curbs that have been going on in terms of chips, the impact on supply chains because of trade negotiations, and particularly tariff. And obviously the Supreme Court tariff decision this week is a boost for technology. I've got 3 points of some of the implications in the show links, and you can kind of go through that. It's very brief to catch up on. But in general, what I wanted to say is that the tariff issue is leaning a little bit more positive for technology, especially in terms of supply constraints for things like memory and memory chips and supply chains, especially for AI devices and AI wearables. Potentially that could ease up a teeny bit, but we don't know yet. It's early. The decision just got announced a couple of days ago. So I wanted to highlight that this is a very important element. It's going to be very qualitative to assess because there are so many political dynamics changing. But it's been a major headwind to technology and AI this year, remains so. But the headwinds have receded a teeny bit because of this development. It's been an obsession detail of mine, which is why I put it in my obsession of the week category. So with that, I wanted to summarize again. So that's the program that I have. Wanted to go through this. A lot of the summary of all of this is in the show notes. So please take a look at that. As usual, if you have questions, comments, please send them my way. And as usual, likes and subscribes always appreciated. Thank you again for joining us again this week. And we'll see you for episode 44. Stay tuned.